The Swarmlord is supposed to be the Tyranid hive mind's ultimate weapon, a creature of immense psychic and physical power. So why does it show up, look absolutely terrifying, and then immediately get folded like a pancake? Why does it eat elves like it's legally obligated to lose the moment a named character walks onto the page? In this episode of Powerscaling Peeps, we're breaking down how powerful the Swarmlord should be, then analyzing its biggest and most important fights across Warhammer 40K to finally figure out the truth. Is the Swarmlord actually a monster, or is this bug boy a massive fraud? Get ready to jump into the cowhole, folks. Say it with me, fellas. It's time to Powerscale. Now, before we start accusing this thing of frauddom, we need to establish exactly what the Swarmlord is supposed to be, because on paper, this bug should be an absolute nightmare. First off, the Swarmlord is the pinnacle of the Hive Tyrant bioform. It's a unique variant, and across all of Warhammer 40k, there's only one in existence. Also, it appears the hive mind only spawns the Swarmlord when conventional Tyranid strategies fail, or when the enemy requires, let's call it, special attention. This is the hive mind essentially saying, alright, enough messing around, time to rock this prick shit and eat his planet. What makes the Swarmlord truly unique and far more dangerous than any standard hive tyrant is that it possesses a degree of independent consciousness beyond most Tyranid organisms. Across its existence, it has destroyed empires, driven entire civilizations to extinction, and is considered the foremost Tyranid threat to the galaxy. Additionally, as stated in the Tyranid 9th edition Codex, if the Swarmlord perishes on the battlefield, the hive mind reabsorbs its consciousness through the synaptic web. The Swarmlord is therefore deathless and can be regrown to face the enemy again, returning stronger each time. Let that sink in for a second, folks. That means the Swarmlord retains the memories of every enemy it has ever faced. Every tactic, every weapon, every mistake. It is a veteran of countless wars across the eons, carrying a level of accumulated combat knowledge that puts it up there as one of the best beings in the setting, at least in terms of combat skill. And other codexes support this. The Tyranid 8th edition describes the Swarmlord as the Tyranid's deadliest servant, and the 9th edition goes even further, calling it the very pinnacle of all Tyranid bioforms and the ultimate conduit of the hive mind. This is important because if the Swarmlord is the ultimate conduit, the absolute pinnacle of the Tyranid race, then lore-wise, it sits above Hive Tyrants, Zonothropes, Norn Emissaries, Biotitans, and above virtually every other Tyranid organism in terms of authority, prowess, and importance. The Tyranid 8th edition Codex even spells it out bluntly. The Swarmlord is to a Hive Tyrant what a Hive Tyrant is to a Termagant. That is one absurd power gap. Like, holy cow, herd. Physically, the Swarmlord is armed with 4 bone sabers, each crackling with disruptive energy and capable of slicing through adamantium and void shields as if they were nothing. These are not standard bone swords. Each blade contains a crystalline core not native to our galaxy. Yeah, what the hell, man. With these sabers, the Swarmlord can parry attacks at such speed that its enemies find it nearly impossible to land a blow at all. But folks, that's not all. The Swarmlord is also a psyker, and a very powerful one at that. As a supreme synapse creature, the Swarmlord possesses access to the full range of Tyranid psychic capabilities. That means telepathy, biomancy, foresight, matter manipulation, reality manipulation, and the hive mind disciplines are all working together to make it not just a physical apex predator, but a psychic apex predator as well. Oh boy, what fun. Beyond that, the Swarmlord also possesses the Shadow in the Warp. For those who don't know, the Shadow in the Warp functions as a power or psychic nullification, severing a psyker's connection to the warp entirely. Attempting to use psychic powers under the Shadow can cause overwhelming fear, psychic backlash, and even outright insanity. And if that wasn't enough, the Swarmlord's body is a walking war crime. according to the 4th edition Tyranid Codex. As the peak Tyranid organism, the Swarmlord should be comparable or superior to Hive Tyrants and Carnifexes in regeneration. Those creatures, like Hive Tyrants, can regenerate limbs, organs, skin, and even devastating cranial and neck damage at speeds that would be almost fatal to any other organism. So a Swarmlord should be able to do this at a much faster rate. On top of that, the massive vents along the Swarmlord's back constantly release thick clouds of spores. If an enemy inhales these spores, they begin breaking down from the inside. According to the 8th edition Codex, these clouds contain millions upon millions of microorganisms that enter the victim's system and start actively deconstructing them. Wow, that's kind of broken. And remember, this thing isn't just muscle and instinct. Its connection to the hive mind is so powerful that it can manifest within any hive fleet, transcending physical separation entirely. So let's be very, very clear before we even look at a single on-page feat. Based purely on statements, abilities, psychic dominance, regeneration, war gear, autonomy, and narrative role, the Swarmlord should be, at the absolute bare minimum, low Primarch tier. That means the Swarmlord should be at least close to or relative to the less powerful, unamped, unaltered, undemonic base Primarchs like Alfarius, Omegon, Lorgar, or Guilliman. If two separate codexes describe it as the ultimate Tyranid bioform, then it has to sit at least there, maybe even higher to be honest. Realistically, it should be one of the strongest beings in the entire galaxy, especially because it is the pinnacle of the Tyranid race. All in all, it sounds pretty goddamn cracked, right Herd? But now comes the fun part, because statements are one thing, reality is another. Now that we've established how powerful the Swarmlord should be, let's look at its many fights across Warhammer 40K to see if this bug boy is actually a monster or if the Swarmlord is a fraud.
Come on over here. Come on over here. No, you flipped me off. Come on, coward. No. Come on. You're not an intellectual. You're a fake and a fraud.
Across Warhammer 40K, the Swarmlord has multiple fights we can look at to truly answer the question we're asking in today's installment. Here are the 7 fights we're going to be looking at today. First, his 2 duels against Chapter Master Marneus Calgar of the Ultramarines from the 5th and 6th edition Tyranid Codexes. Second, his fight against Chapter Master Dante of the Blood Angels in the book Devastation of Baal. Third, his battle against an Overfiend twice from Warzone Nocturus Book 2 Critical Mass. Fourth, his battle against Prince Uriel, High Admiral of the Iodin Craftworld in the book Valador. Fifth, his fight against Chaplain and Master of Sanctity Ortan Cassius and the Death Watch as seen in Space Marine Legends Cassius. Sixth, his fight against 3 custodians, including a shield captain in the book Duty Unto Death. And finally, his most recent duel against Commander Farsight in the book Blade of Truth. We're going to go through each of these fights from the very top and work our way down, and whenever a fight shows the Swarmlord underperforming, relying on outside help, or flat out losing in the worst way possible, I'm raising the fraud flag. By the end of the video, if there are 4 or more fraud flags collected, then the Swarmlord will be labeled a loser, a feat leech, and worst of all, a big fat fraud. And unfortunately for the Swarmlord, we don't even have to wait long, because we're starting with the Swarmlord's first major duel against Marneus Calgar. Their first duel thankfully ends with the Swarmlord victorious, and Calgar left severely wounded. But unfortunately, there's a catch, folks. The Swarmlord did not fight alone. The 6th edition explicitly states Calgar would have to face the Swarmlord and its bodyguard alone. So not only was Calgar fighting alone, but the Swarmlord was leading a full squad of elite Tyrant Guard into battle against a lone Chapter Master. That changes the context of this fight a whole lot, because instead of Calgar straight up losing, it's more like Calgar lost to the Swarmlord and some elite Tyranids. Even further, the Codex says, Calgar fought like a hero of legend, but there were simply too many foes, and he was finally laid low, his body rent and torn. Calgar's last strength was expended in mortal combat with the Swarmlord itself, and the Hive Tyrant towered over the Space Marine, blades raised to deliver the killing blow. This attack is then stopped by the Ultramarines' Honor Guard, who arrive to save their chapter master and evacuate him via Thunderhawk to receive life-saving treatment. Even though Calgar was beaten to near death, this first fight is simply insane, quite possibly raising not just one, but several red fraud flags on how the hell was this even possible. The text clearly states Calgar was alone, while the Swarmlord was fighting with his entire Tyrant Guard against a single chapter master.
That's some bullshit.
And then we move on to the second duel between Calgar and the Swarmlord, and this time around, Calgar emerges victorious, facing the Swarmlord down in a true one-on-one fight and killing it with his bare hands, as seen in both the 5th and 6th Tyranid codexes. In a replay of history, Marnea's Calgar faced none other than the Swarmlord, a reincarnation of the same beast that had laid him low on Macragge. This time, however, it would be Calgar who emerged triumphant, slaying the beast in an epic duel.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
So yep, Calgar kills a Swarmlord in single combat with no backup, since this is a straight up one-on-one fight. Which implies that earlier on their duel on Macragge, Calgar only lost because of the Swarmlord being aided by the Tyrant Guard. Which is brutal logic, I know, but it tracks. So now we need to ask just how powerful Calgar is, and does it make the Swarmlord look like a big fat fraud? Marnea's Calgar is a chapter master, one of the most decorated space marines in the entire Imperium, equipped with the gauntlets of Ultramar and is a veteran of countless wars. He may not be a Primarch or a Custodian, but Calgar is absolutely a top-tier chapter master, with some of the strongest feats of any space marine in the current setting. He has defeated an Avatar of Cain, Angareth the Unbound, Demon Prince Makar, and while he does lose to a Keeper of Secrets and to Abaddon the Despoiler, those losses actually help ground his power level, rather than inflate it unrealistically. And to be honest, I don't even think Calgar killing the Swarmlord is automatically an anti-feat on its own. Calgar is powerful enough that in a vacuum, it could theoretically make sense. I know, what the hell am I talking about? He arguably deserves his own full breakdown video because of how impressive and stupid his combat feats and statements are. We'll save that for another video. But if you strip away all of his feats, Calgar is just a chapter master, but once you include them, he becomes something else entirely. He has defeated a greater demon that Lorgar Aurelian himself struggled against in the Book Aurelian, and he has brought down an Avatar of Cain, a being whose power level fluctuates depending on the shard, but is still a fragment of the Eldar God of War. It's also worth stressing that Fulgrim, another Primarch, fought an Avatar of Cain and did not casually or effortlessly annihilate it. So Calgar standing victorious over one at all is kinda nutty. Now, of course, there is some context involved with these accomplishments. Calgar's victories against Angarath and the Avatar of Cain involve support from his Honor Guard, meaning he did not fight completely alone. But even with that, he still emerged victorious against these high-tier foes, and I have to remind everyone, he is still a simple space marine. Which brings us back to the Swarmlord. On paper, this fight should not even be close. Even accepting Calgar's absurdly strong resume, the Swarmlord is supposed to be the apex bioform of an entire intergalactic super species. So when you look at the actual lore, it paints a really awkward picture. In their first duel, the Swarmlord defeats Calgar, but only while backed by elite Tyrant Guard, who overwhelmed him through numbers rather than clear superiority. And in their second duel, Marneus Calgar kills the Swarmlord in single combat while he has no backup. Overall, this is just bad. Truly and utterly horrific. And that, folks, raises some serious fraud flags. Even taking into account Calgar's obscene feats, the Swarmlord still looks like a giant fraud, which should never be the case for a being said to be the pinnacle of its entire race. So unless you want to call the entire Tyranid race a big fat fraud, I'm raising the fraud flag on this series of fights against Marneus Calgar, which adds 1 to the fraud counter. And this, unfortunately, is not the end.
No, 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 no!
Because Calgar isn't the only named chapter master to do this. Dante does it as well. So Dante, of course, will be the next fight we're looking at from the book, The Devastation of Baal. Dante and the Swarmlord fight as Baal falls around him. And in this fight, the Swarmlord is clearly winning. He completely overwhelms Dante physically for most of the duel, tanks dozens of blows from the Axe Mortalis, fights through losing limbs without hesitation, breaks Dante's jump pack, his iron halo, and nearly his mind, and finally impales him through the torso, secondary heart, and the spine. By every measurable metric, the Swarmlord wins this fight. But then, we are hit with one of the dumbest moments in fiction I've ever seen in my Cow life. The Swarmlord lifted him high, screaming in victory, and swung its arms down to flick Dante from the blade shard so it might finish him on the sand.
Not bad, not bad.
Then this happens. Brace yourself for this stupidity. Dante yells, "By his blood do I serve." The beast hesitated, only for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. As it was raising its remaining 2 blades to cut Dante in 2, the commander raised the perdition pistol. "My service is done, I give thanks. My life is finished, I give thanks. Blood returns to blood, another will take up my burden in my stead, I give thanks." He fired the perdition pistol at point-blank range into the Swarmlord's face. What the hell? Why did the Swarmlord hesitate? And why did it do it for so gosh darn long? This allows Dante to straight up shoot him in the face. This literally makes no sense for what the Swarmlord is supposed to be. The Swarmlord is not a prideful duelist or theatrical villain. It is the hive mind's supreme tactical organism, defined by ruthless efficiency, perfect calculation, and zero emotional hesitation. There is no biological, strategic, or psychic reason for it to stop when victory is already secured. Dante only survives because the Swarmlord allows him the time to act for some odd reason. And while Dante is unquestionably one of the greatest space marines in the setting, over 1500 years old, armed with great relic war gear, and possesses feats of his own like defeating Skarbrand, he is still just like Calgar, a space marine. The Swarmlord's defeat here is not the result of Dante being superior, but of a blatant narrative hesitation at the exact moment the kill should have been delivered. From a pure power scaling perspective, the Swarmlord almost wins this fight, but almost doesn't matter when you allow your enemy to deliver a speech and then shoot you in the face. That sudden, unexplainable pause is fatal, and it shouldn't exist for a being like this. So yuppard, let's wave and raise another fraud flag, which brings our score to a total of 2. Oh boy, I'm really praying it doesn't get worse from here, folks. But those are some famous last words. Next up, we have the Swarmlord's 2 encounters with the Overfiend of Octurus from Warzone Octurus. In their first clash, the Swarmlord does what it always seems to do apparently. It arrives escorted by hundreds of Tyrant Guard, carving its way through the battlefield until it reaches the Orc Warlord. When the 2 finally meet, the text makes it clear that this is a brutal, prolonged duel. The Swarmlord, accompanied by hundreds of Tyrant Guard, fought its way to the Orc Warlord. Scores of Tyrant Guard sacrificed themselves to shield their charge. But time and again, the Overfiend blocked their decapitating strikes. After hours, the Orc eventually got the better of the fight, landing a devastating punch into the Tyranid's midriff after crushing a Tyrant Guard who tried to stop him. He grabbed the Swarmlord's head in a claw and ripped the beast in two. So despite clearly being third-partied, the Overfiend repeatedly blocked the Swarmlord's killing blows and finally landed a decisive hit of his own, punching through the Swarmlord's midsection, seizing its head and its claw, and ripping the Swarmlord in half. That's the first fight, and once again, the pattern holds. The Swarmlord does not fight alone and still loses.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
The second duel comes later from the same source, and the context for this one holds a ton of weight. By the time of their duel, the Overfiend is already wounded and bleeding heavily from earlier engagements. The Swarmlord dueled with the Overfiend, landing several blows by making it impossible for the wounded greenskin to know when the next strike was coming. Eventually, however, through his bleeding and wild attacks, the war boss left the slightest opening. The Tyrant Lord of the Hive Mind moved in for the kill. At long last, the Swarmlord drove two of its blades down the Overfiend's head. So this time, we see the Swarmlord return, again backed by hundreds of Tyrant Guard and Carnifaxes acting as living shields. But this time, the duel tilts in the Swarmlord's favor. Using its speed, it overwhelms the injured war boss, eventually exploiting a momentary opening to sever the power cables of one of the Overfiend's claws before driving its blades into his skull and killing him. So, the Swarmlord does eventually win, but let's be honest, folks, about how that win actually happens. In their first duel, the Swarmlord loses despite having the Tyrant Guard aiding him. And in the second fight, it only secures the kill after the Overfiend has already been badly wounded, and even then, the Orc still puts up a serious fight. Hold on. Before we start waving fraud flags though, we need to talk about how strong the Overfiend actually is. According to Warzone Arcturus Book 2, to become the Overfiend, an Orc must possess incredible physical might and cunning, slaughtering dozens of rival warlords, each of them colossal, battle-hardened monsters in their own right. This places the Overfiend far above a standard Orc war boss. He is the absolute strongest of the Orc Empire of Arcturus, and according to that same codex, he is the second biggest Orc in the galaxy, and remember folks, the larger an Orc is, the stronger they are. That said, however, he is not on the level of the Beast, who is explicitly Primarch tier, nor is he quite at Ghazghkull Thraka's peak post-Psychic Awakening level. Base Ghazghkull Thraka, after all, killed an unnamed Greater Demon, which is a roughly low Primarch tier foe. That gives us a useful benchmark, which means, realistically, the Overfiend and the Swarmlord should be roughly in the same weight class. And that's where the issue lies. It is reasonable that the Swarmlord might struggle against the Overfiend. It is even reasonable that it could lose the first duel. What's much harder to swallow though is that the pinnacle of the Tyranid hive mind, an immortal, endlessly learning commander, requires his Tyrant Guard in both fights and only secures a clean win once its opponent is already crippled. It's a tough decision, but I'm not going to wave the fraud flag here.
Get your numbers up. I had to get my number.
But that flag is on the verge of flapping violently in the wind. Because while this doesn't outright contradict the Swarmlord's supposed power level, it does quietly suggest something insane. That the absolute best of the Tyranid race is only barely competitive to the second biggest Orc in the galaxy. Wow. Not exactly flattering. I'm sorry, Tyranid fans, that was a low blow, but I can't help myself, I'm just speaking the truth. So the fraud flag counter stays at 2. Moving on to our fourth fight, which is against Prince Uriel and the Swarmlord, which looks awful at first glance, because the Swarmlord is killed in a single decisive strike with no prolonged duel or adaptation. Smoothly, he drew back his arm and cast the spear Ulthalthanesh at the creature. The spear screamed a polyphonic wrath song as it hurtled through the air, passing in an eye blink to pierce the jaw of the Swarmlord, drive up through the soft mouth into the swollen brain case, and emerge gleaming from the top of the armored skull. The Swarmlord toppled, lifeless. So as you can see in this excerpt, Uriel confronts it directly, baits an attack, and exploits the briefest moment of delay when the Swarmlord's claw becomes embedded in a corpse. Which is believable to me. In that instant, Uriel hurls the Spear of Twilight, which pierces the Swarmlord's jaw, travels through its brain, and erupts from the top of his skull, killing it instantly.
That's rough, buddy.
This is one of the rare cases where the loss actually makes sense within the lore. Uriel is not overpowering the Swarmlord through strength or speed, nor is the Swarmlord hesitating for narrative reasons. Instead, the outcome hinges completely on the weapon involved, which is the Spear of Twilight. The Spear of Twilight is an ancient Eldar weapon of catastrophic power, and to be more specific, is one of the 5 Crone Swords. The Crone Swords are all powerful with different abilities, and the Spear of Twilights are so potent that it literally devours the souls of those it stabs. And Uriel almost dies in the process because the spear even starts trying to drain the soul of the hive mind itself. When a weapon of that magnitude is used with flawless timing and accuracy against a brief opening, even something like the Swarmlord can be killed instantly without implying inferiority or incompetence. Because of that, this moment does not warrant a fraud flag. The Swarmlord does not rely on outside help and does not pause or hesitate in a way that contradicts its nature. It loses because its opponent wields one of the strongest weapons in the setting and capitalizes on a split-second mistake, which is consistent with how Crone Swords are meant to function. It is a bad-looking loss, but a justified one, and for that reason, the fraud flag stays down for this 4th fight. So let's move on to the next, the 5th fight. This fight is against Chaplain Ortan Cassius and the Death Watch, and is arguably one of the strangest Swarmlord showings in the setting, because this big bug actually starts off pretty strong in their duel. The Swarmlord first absolutely butchers the Space Marine squad going against him. The text repeatedly emphasizes that the Swarmlord is faster than its size should allow, casually parrying power weapons and shrugging off bolter fire. In true melee terms, this is exactly how the strongest Tyranid organism should appear. The problem, and yes, of course, there is a problem, begins the moment the Swarmlord decides to flex its psychic muscles. For the first time across any of these fights. I know. What the hell? Instead of finishing Cassius physically, despite having already demonstrated it can kill Space Marines effortlessly, it stops, deliberately pauses, and attempts to execute Cassius with a brute force psychic attack. A horrific scream, a brute force assault that drove a psychic spike into the mind of the target, shattering its brain functions. This is framed as one of the Swarmlord's most lethal abilities. Something that leaves victims as described as soul-dead husks. And yet, Cassius survives this attack.
What?
Not because he is a psyker, not because he has some weird special war gear, but because he grits his way through it with sheer willpower and chaplain conditioning.
That is without a doubt the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
That alone is incredibly questionable, but what really breaks the encounter is what happens next. The Swarmlord assumes Cassius is dead, turns its back on him, and shifts its focus to finishing off a crippled Marine. That single error allows Cassius to recover, grab Hellfire rounds, and unload molecular acid bolt fire directly into the Swarmlord's face.
I don't care what universe you're from. That's gotta hurt.
Followed by repeated strikes that crack its skull open. From there, the fight collapses into a dogpile as the Marines swarm it from all sides, exploiting wounds Cassius created, and although the Swarmlord still manages to kill another Marine in a last burst of speed, it is eventually overwhelmed and executed. So the issue here, folks, is that this is not a clever ambush, a great strategy, or a superior foe besting the Swarmlord. This is the Swarmlord falling for the oldest trick in the book. The quote-unquote, he's dead, trust me bro, from a non-psyker space marine. Yet it still disengages, misreads a situation, and then pays for it with its life. It literally makes no sense. Shouldn't the Swarmlord know that it killed Cassius if it was indeed inside his mind? I don't know, guys. It seems like very silly to me. This is narrative hesitation and ability inconsistency. The exact same issue I've been calling out time and time again. Curse you, Games Workshop! Curse you! So, does this raise a fraud flag? Yes, this fight is absolutely deserving of a fraud flag. The Swarmlord dominates physically, killing multiple elite marines, but then dies because it abandons its effective combat strategy in favor of a psychic flex it doesn't need to do. Sound familiar, folks? Yeah. Psychers make no sense. And just like that, we're sitting at 3 fraud flags, with only 2 fights to go. Make your bets, people. Make your bets. Does the Swarmlord claw its way out of this video with even a shred of credibility left? Or does the so-called apex of the Tyranid race go down in history as a certified fraud? Let's move on to the 6th fight, which I've discussed previously in my Custodies power scaling video regarding the Custodians fighting the Swarmlord and a whole tendril of the High Fleet. This comes from the book Duty Unto Death, and in it, the Swarmlord fights 3 Custodians, including a shield captain. The Swarmlord enters the battlefield and charges headlong into the 3 Adeptus Custodes. It kills 2 of them in short order, each with a single strike. The Swarmlord continues forward and engages shield captain Tamerlane in a prolonged duel. This fight is framed as a clash of equals, and the text even says as much. They were evenly matched. Opposites mirrors. One the pinnacle of human genetic mastery, the other a crescendo of accelerated hyperevolution. Finally, the shield captain kills the Swarmlord, triggering a psychic death scream across the swarm. So now we need to ask, does the shield captain killing a Swarmlord actually make sense? In terms of power scaling, a shield captain is one of the most elite warriors in the Imperium, far beyond Space Marines, and it is said they are worth 3 Custodian Guard from the 8th edition Custodes Codex, and from that same source, it states, the rank of shield captain is purely martial. It signifies the Custodian is responsible to lead their colleagues in combat. More than exceptional fighters, shield captains are intelligent field officers able to understand a battle at a mere glance and lead forces accordingly. That said, however, they are still definitely not Primarchs, nor are they supposed to consistently defeat those that should be in the low Primarch tier. This becomes especially questionable when you remember that Abaddon the Despoiler has one-shot a shield captain in combat, which implies that Abaddon scales decisively above them. If the Swarmlord is meant to be the hive mind's ultimate war avatar, then by pure power scaling logic, it should sit above a shield captain, especially one it is already physically matching after killing 2 Custodians back to back. That's what makes this fight so tricky. The Swarmlord performs well and fights intelligently, but at the end of the day, losing a straight up 1v1 to a shield captain is not a great look. Even accounting for exhaustion and prior wounds, this is a being that should require Primarch level force or overwhelming numbers to bring it down. The fact that it doesn't quite clear the bar here raises some uncomfortable questions about how dangerous the Swarmlord actually is. So while this isn't the most egregious loss on record, it's still enough to matter. The Swarmlord should be above this fight, and it isn't. Which means I'm going to award the 4th fraud flag here, bringing our grand total to 4, which means the overall verdict on the Swarmlord in this video has already been decided.
Hey, you know who lives in this house? A great big phony! That's right, a phony lives here! A big fat phony!
The court has spoken and the sentence has been passed. But Yes, but before we close the book entirely, we do need to look at the final major showing the Swarmlord has when it clashes with Commander Farsight in the book Blade of Truth. And I'll be fair here, because if there's any place you could argue the Swarmlord is mounting a comeback, it's in this book. The first encounter with the Swarmlord and Commander Farsight is perfectly written. The Swarmlord attacks with actual intelligence, I know what is surprising, deploying bio-EMP organisms that punch straight through Tau shielding. The Swarmlord then proceeds to shrug off artillery, walks through fire with a bioelectric force field, and then casually deletes one of the Tau mechs, destroying him with a psychic blast, powerful enough to cripple a broadside from range. When Farsight finally commits to attack, the Swarmlord reads him instantly. It matches the Dawnblade head-on, overpowers Farsight physically, impales him clean through the battlesuit, bisects the XV8, and then finishes the encounter with a layered ambush, baiting Farsight into retreat and springing a living minefield in a perfect counter.
That's what I'm talking about.
This is a total loss for Farsight, no debate, and their second duel is actually quite good as well. This time, the Swarmlord charges directly and is still straight up terrifying. It tanks plasma fire, trades blows with the Dawnblade yet again, nearly impales Farsight, and continues fighting even after losing blades and an eye. But the context to this fight is incredibly important, as the Swarmlord is no longer fighting just Farsight. He's actively being shot at by railgun fire, his supporting Tyranid psi organisms are being picked off, a Tau corvette enters the fight and unloads a massive reactive bolt round on the Swarmlord, and most importantly, there's a nearby Psyker disrupting the Swarmlord's psychic attack entirely. Only after its psychic output collapses and its bioelectric shield crackles to nothing does Farsight land the killing blow, and Farsight himself states, "When we fight as one, there's nothing we can't achieve." That line shows that Farsight had no chance fighting the Swarmlord alone. I think these two fights are nearly a perfect way to show the Swarmlord. Farsight is quite strong himself, having defeated a greater demon of Khorne in single combat, but when he faces the Swarmlord, he gets completely dismantled. The second fight only reinforces that point more. Farsight emerges victorious only because he has help from various different allies. And that is honestly the perfect way to write the Swarmlord. So as we come to the end of this video, we have to answer the question that all started it. Is the Swarmlord a fraud? Across its 7 major named duels and defining battles in Warhammer 40K lore, the Swarmlord has built a reputation that is uneven, to put it politely. When it's written properly, like its fights against the Overfiend, Prince Uriel, and its most recent encounter with Commander Farsight, the Swarmlord actually feels believable. In those encounters, it comes across as what it's supposed to be. The hive mind's apex war organism, a creature that overwhelms its enemies through superior strength, speed, psychic dominance, and intelligence. But then we have the other 4 fights. Against Marneus Calgar and Dante, the Swarmlord doesn't just struggle, it outright loses to a chapter master in ways that makes it feel less like the pinnacle of Tyranid evolution, and more like a particularly dangerous speed bump. These feats don't feel earned through clever strategy or overwhelming force, they feel like a narrative convenience. The problem only gets worse in its duels with Ortan Cassius and the Shield Captain, where the Swarmlord fails to project its prowess, inevitability, or psychic dominance you would expect from the Swarmlord. Instead, it comes across as just another big bug waiting to be squashed by the righteous warriors of the Imperium. So, while looking at all of its fights across the setting, the verdict is clear. The Swarmlord is a fraud. A terrifying concept, incredible design, and an inconsistent execution that too often turns the hive mind's greatest weapon into a recurring boss who exists mainly to lose dramatically. But I'll have to say, this might be changing. As we see in its most recent fight against Farsight, the Swarmlord looks like it's written correctly, and if Games Workshop sticks to that approach, maybe, just maybe, this bug can start reclaiming some dignity. But for now, the Swarmlord is a fraud. And with that, this video comes to a conclusion. This marks only the beginning of a brand new series where we hunt down the biggest frauds in Warhammer 40K. Don't worry, I'm definitely not coming for the Avatar of Cain next. I'm merely joking, please don't sneak into my house and milk me, Eldar fans. You are totally relevant in 40K. Completely, 100%. Before you all go, a huge shout out to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members. You guys keep the channel alive, and I genuinely appreciate every single one of you. If you want behind the scenes content or just to help support the channel, the links are down below. Shout out the cool cows already there. Imposse Paul, Nathan, Musty, Keydri, Nico149, Omar, Musty Lawyer, Sept Capazilla, Lag, and Dinkleberry. If you enjoyed this silly power scaling analysis, drop a like, leave a comment telling me who you think the next fraud should be, and make sure you're subscribed. Because this series is just getting started, herd. Make sure you eat your grass, stay milked, and I'll see you all very soon.